My name is Doug Wilson, and at 22 years old, I never expected to become the owner of a $120 million company. My grandfather built Wilson Manufacturing from nothing, and we always had a special bond. But when he gifted me the company at my birthday party, I had no idea it would tear my family apart. My stepdad Richard had other plans, and my own mother chose his side. I thought I lost everything until Grandpa revealed his true masterstroke. Before I continue this wild journey that changed my life forever, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever had family try to take what was rightfully yours. Growing up, my grandfather Harold Wilson was my hero. Everyone called him Harry, but to me, he was just Grandpa, the smartest, kindest man I knew. Some of my earliest memories are sitting on his lap in his home office as he showed me blueprints and explained how things worked. He had this way of making complicated ideas simple enough for a child to understand, and I soaked up every word like a sponge. When I was 8, my world shattered. My dad, Michael, died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday night. I remember the police officers at our door, my mother Jennifer collapsing in tears, and then Grandpa arriving within the hour, steady as a rock despite losing his only son. In the months that followed, while Mom struggled with grief, Grandpa stepped in. He drove me to school, came to my baseball games, and made sure I never felt alone. "Your father would be so proud of you, Doug," he would tell me, "and I am going to make sure you have everything you need to succeed in life." Grandpa had built Wilson Manufacturing from his garage in the 70s. He started with a single innovative design for industrial valves, and through sheer determination and business savvy, expanded into a company that now employed over 500 people. By the time I was in middle school, Wilson Manufacturing was worth millions, with factories in 3 states. Every summer from age 12, Grandpa insisted I work at the company. Not in some cushy made-up position, but rotating through departments, learning the business from the ground up. I started in the mailroom, moved to the factory floor, then customer service, then accounting. The employees got a kick out of the boss's grandson doing the grunt work. But Grandpa was insistent. "Nobody respects a leader who has not walked in their shoes," he would say. "Every position matters, and you need to understand that firsthand." When I was 17, Mom remarried. Richard Brooks seemed nice enough at first, charming and attentive to her. He was a business consultant with an impressive resume and a confident manner that made Mom feel secure again. But from the first time Grandpa and Richard met, there was tension. They smiled and shook hands, but I noticed how Grandpa's eyes narrowed slightly, how he asked very specific questions about Richard's background. "Be careful around that one," Grandpa told me privately. "Men who talk more about their connections than their accomplishments are usually selling something." I chose to study business administration in college, with a minor in engineering that made Grandpa especially proud. While my friends partied through school, I maintained a 3.9 GPA and spent holidays and summers learning more about Wilson Manufacturing. Grandpa and I would have dinner once a week when I was home, discussing business strategies and industry trends like equals. "You have good instincts, Doug," he told me during my junior year, after I presented him with an idea to modernize our inventory system. "Better than mine at your age, and certainly better than the overpaid consultants Richard keeps recommending." That was another change. Richard had somehow maneuvered himself into an advisory position with the company. Despite having no experience in manufacturing, Mom encouraged it, saying it was good to have fresh eyes on the business. But I noticed how Richard always pushed for faster growth, more risk, and questionable partnerships that Grandpa consistently vetoed. Grandpa and I had our special rituals. Every other Sunday, weather permitting, we would go fishing at Lake Matthews. We rarely caught anything worth keeping, but those quiet mornings in the boat were when he shared his most valuable lessons. "Business is like fishing, Doug," he said once. "Patience matters more than fancy equipment. Know the waters, respect nature, and understand that some days you come home empty-handed, but wiser." During my senior year internship at Wilson Manufacturing, I created a digital strategy that increased our online sales by 30%. The board took notice, and several members privately told Grandpa they were impressed with my work. I noticed Richard became more attentive to me after that, asking questions about my plans post-graduation. "You know, Doug, he said during one family dinner. With your talent, you could work anywhere. Silicon Valley, New York, even internationally. Wilson Manufacturing is a fine company. But there is a big world out there. Mom nodded along enthusiastically, but I saw the game he was playing. If I left, there would be no clear successor to Grandpa. Richard was positioning himself. As graduation approached, Mom became increasingly distant. She missed my honors ceremony because Richard had planned a weekend trip to Palm Springs. But Grandpa was there, front row, beaming with pride. At the small celebration dinner afterward, he handed me a wrapped gift. "Open it when you are alone," he said with a wink. Inside was a vintage pocket watch that had belonged to his father, and a handwritten note. Time is the only truly limited resource. Spend it with those who value you, and on things that matter. Your journey is just beginning. I had no idea then how prophetic those words would be, or how soon they would be tested. My 22nd birthday fell on a perfect June Saturday. Grandpa had insisted on hosting the celebration at his estate, a beautiful 10-acre property with gardens that had been my playground as a child. The party was larger than I expected, with not just family and my college friends, but also key executives from Wilson Manufacturing, business partners, and even a state senator who had been Grandpa's friend for decades. "Your grandfather has been planning this for months," Sandra, his executive assistant of 20 years, told me as I arrived. "He has something special in mind." The gardens were transformed with white tents, catering staff in formal attire, and a small string quartet playing near the rose garden. My best friend Marcus whistled low as we surveyed the scene. "Dude, this is not a birthday party. This is a coronation," he joked. But there was truth in his words. Everything felt ceremonial, important. Mom and Richard arrived fashionably late. She kissed my cheek and handed me a small gift bag containing an expensive watch. Richard gave me a firm handshake and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Quite the production your grandfather has put together," he commented. "One might think there is more to celebrate than just another birthday." There was something in his tone that made me uneasy. But before I could analyze it, Grandpa appeared, walking spryly across the lawn to embrace me. There he is, the man of the hour. His voice boomed with genuine joy. 22 years old, the same age I was when I built my first prototype valve. The age when life truly begins. The afternoon was filled with good food, conversation, and multiple toasts to my health and future. I noticed Grandpa having intense discussions with his lawyer, Thomas Blackwell, who had brought a sleek leather briefcase and kept checking his watch. Around 4 o'clock, just as the golden afternoon light bathed the garden, Grandpa clinked his glass and called for attention. The crowd gathered around as he stood on a small platform, Thomas at his side with the briefcase now open. "Friends, family, colleagues," Grandpa began, his voice strong despite his 75 years. "We are here, ostensibly to celebrate my grandson Doug turning 22, but we are actually here to witness something much more significant." A hush fell over the gathering. I felt Marcus squeeze my shoulder in support, though neither of us knew what was coming. "When my son Michael died 14 years ago, I made him a promise," Grandpa continued, his voice catching slightly. "I promised that I would ensure his son would have every opportunity to carry forward our family legacy. Today, I fulfill that promise." Thomas handed him a folder of documents, which Grandpa held up for all to see. "As of today, I am transferring majority ownership and control of Wilson Manufacturing to my grandson, Douglas Michael Wilson." The crowd gasped. My knees nearly buckled. Across the lawn, I saw Richard freeze mid-sip of his champagne, his eyes widening in shock. Mom's hand flew to her throat. "Doug has proven himself not just as my grandson, but as a visionary businessman in his own right. He has earned this through years of learning every aspect of the company, contributing innovative ideas, and demonstrating the character and judgment needed to lead Wilson Manufacturing into the future." Thomas approached me with the folder and a pen. "These documents transfer 75% ownership of Wilson Manufacturing to you, effective immediately," he explained quietly. "Your grandfather will retain 15% and an advisory role on the board. The remaining 10% is divided among key executives as previously arranged. My hand trembled as I signed where indicated. The crowd erupted in applause. And suddenly, I was surrounded by well-wishers, executives promising support, and friends expressing amazement. Through the crowd, I caught glimpses of Richard in urgent conversation with Mom, his face flushed with barely contained anger. After the initial commotion, Grandpa pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the garden. "I know this is overwhelming," he said gently. "But you are ready, Doug. More ready than I was when I started." "Grandpa, I do not know what to say. This is incredible, but also terrifying." He smiled, the crow's feet around his eyes deepening. "Good. A healthy dose of fear keeps a leader honest. But remember this very important lesson. Always watch the details. The devil lives in them, and so does salvation." Before I could ask what he meant, we were interrupted by congratulations from the senator. When I turned back, Grandpa had disappeared into the crowd. I searched for him several times during the remainder of the party but could not find him. Marcus found me near the dessert table, looking shell-shocked. "Congratulations, CEO," he said, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. "But heads up, your stepdad looks like he is planning a murder. He has been working the room, talking to board members." I glanced across the lawn and caught Richard in conversation with Vernon Miller, our chief financial officer. Both men looked serious, and Vernon seemed to be nodding in agreement to whatever Richard was saying. Mom approached as the party began to wind down, her smile tight and her eyes anxious. "Sweetie, what a wonderful surprise," she said, kissing my cheek. "We should talk about this as a family tomorrow. There are many things to consider." Her words seemed innocent enough, but her tone held a warning. As guests began to leave, I noticed Grandpa's car was already gone. He had left without saying goodbye, which was completely out of character. I tried calling his cell phone, but got no answer. That night, as I drove home to the house I still shared with Mom and Richard, I felt both elated and uneasy. Something in Grandpa's manner, the mysterious absence, the cryptic warning about details, it all suggested there was more to this situation than a simple transfer of power. I had no idea how right that feeling was, or how quickly my life was about to change. The morning after my birthday, I awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of hushed, intense conversation from our dining room. Pulling on jeans and a t-shirt, I headed downstairs to find Mom and Richard seated at the table with papers spread before them. They fell silent when I entered. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself coffee. "Something important happening?" Richard cleared his throat and gestured to an empty chair. "Doug, we need to have a family discussion about yesterday's events." I sat down, noting the legal documents and spreadsheets on the table. Some bore the Wilson Manufacturing letterhead. Others appeared to be from Richard's consulting firm, Brooks Strategy Group. "Your grandfather's gesture was certainly dramatic," Richard began, his tone measured and reasonable. "And of course, very generous. But there are practical matters to consider." "What kind of practical matters?" I asked, instantly on guard. "Doug, honey," Mom interjected, her voice gentle but firm. "Running a $120 million company is not like managing a class project. There are responsibilities, complexities, relationships with stakeholders that take years to develop." Richard nodded. "Exactly. Which is why I think the most sensible approach is for me to step in as interim CEO while you learn the ropes. Say, for 3 to 5 years. You would still be the owner on paper, still receive profits, but without the burden of day-to-day operations." I stared at them in disbelief. "That is not happening. Grandpa made me CEO because he knows I am ready. I have been preparing for this my entire life." Richard's smile tightened. "Doug, with all due respect, you do not know what you do not know. For instance, are you aware that the Taylor contract is up for renewal next month? Or that the pension fund needs recalculation due to the new labor laws? Or that 3 board members are concerned about expansion costs?" My stomach dropped. I was not aware of any of those things. Richard, who was supposedly just a occasional consultant, should not have known them either. How do you know about internal matters like that? I demanded. Your mother and I have been taking a more active interest in the company, Richard replied smoothly. Someone needed to. With your grandfather's health declining. His health? Grandpa is fine. He was literally just throwing a huge party yesterday. Mom reached for my hand, which I pulled away. Sweetie, Dad has been having memory issues. Small things, but noticeable. The board has concerns about some of his recent decisions, including this impulsive transfer of power. My world tilted. This was the first I had heard about any health issues with Grandpa. But why would he not tell me if something was wrong? This is ridiculous, I said, standing up. I am calling Grandpa right now. He left for his fishing cabin this morning, Mom said quickly. No cell service up there. He said he needed time to think. That made no sense. Grandpa never went to the cabin without inviting me, especially after big events we would want to discuss. Then I will call Thomas Blackwell. He handled the transfer documents. Richard's expression hardened. Thomas is on vacation. 2 weeks in Europe. Unreachable. Unreachable. Too convenient. Everything about this situation felt wrong. Look, Richard continued, his tone softening to one of paternal concern. No one is trying to take anything away from you. Think of this as mentorship. You will still be learning the business, just with guidance. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I am the owner now. Grandpa chose me. Not you. Mom stood, her face flushing. Douglas, be reasonable. Richard has years of business experience. He is only trying to help himself to my company, you mean. Our company, Richard corrected. Your mother and I are family too. I laughed bitterly. You have been my stepfather for 5 years. You have never shown any interest in my career, except to suggest I take jobs far away from Wilson Manufacturing. Mom's eyes flashed with anger. Richard has been nothing but supportive. If you cannot see that and accept his help, then perhaps you should find your own place to live. This house cannot accommodate your ego and ingratitude. The words hit like a physical blow. Are you seriously threatening to kick me out because I will not let your husband take over my company? Then pack your bags and leave this house, she snapped. When you are ready to discuss this like an adult, you can come back. I stared at her, seeing a stranger where my mother should have been. How had Richard gained such control over her? Over the company? None of this made sense. Fine, I said, my voice deadly calm. I will be gone within the hour. As I headed upstairs to pack, I tried calling Grandpa again, straight to voicemail. I then called Thomas Blackwell's office, only to be told by his secretary that he was indeed on vacation, but had left instructions that any Wilson Manufacturing matters should be directed to another partner, James Livingston. When I asked to speak to James, I was told he was in meetings all day. While throwing clothes into a duffel bag, my phone buzzed with a text from Sandra, Grandpa's assistant. Something strange happening. Richard just walked into office with new security codes. Call me secure line. She included a number I did not recognize. When I called, Sandra spoke in hushed tones. Doug, Richard has scheduled an executive committee meeting for tomorrow morning. The agenda includes leadership transition planning. He already has company credentials I did not authorize. Something is not right. My blood ran cold. Sandra, have you heard from Grandpa today? No, and that is unusual. He always checks in, especially after big events. What about his health? Has he been having memory problems? Sandra sounded genuinely confused. Memory problems? No, your grandfather has the sharpest mind of anyone I know. Who told you that? By the time I finished packing, Mom was nowhere to be seen. Richard sat in the living room, pretending to read the Wall Street Journal. Doug, be sensible, he said as I headed for the door. Family disagreements can be resolved. There is no need for dramatic exits. I paused, studying him. Tell me something, Richard. What exactly do you get out of running Wilson Manufacturing? Your consulting business seems successful enough. A flicker of something calculating crossed his face before the mask of concern returned. I simply want what is best for this family. For all of us. I do not believe you, I said quietly. And I will find out what you are really after. I walked out the door, unsure where I was going, but absolutely certain of one thing. The battle for my grandfather's company had just begun, and I was starting at a serious disadvantage. Marcus did not hesitate when I called him. "Stay as long as you need, man," he said, helping me bring my bags into his apartment. Though I gotta say, being thrown out for inheriting a company has to be a first. I spent that night making calls, trying to reach Grandpa through every possible channel. His home phone went unanswered. The cabin landline rang endlessly. His personal email received an automatic reply. "Away on personal business. Will respond upon return." The next morning, I received another text from Sandra. Executive meeting started. Richard introduced as interim CEO with your mother's backing. 3 board members questioned arrangement, but were shown documents you supposedly signed. Emergency board meeting called for Friday. Documents I signed. Sandra, I never signed anything giving Richard control. I know. These appear to be forged or altered. Be careful. Who you trust right now. Sandra became my eyes and ears inside Wilson Manufacturing over the next few days. She reported that Richard had moved into Grandpa's office, was reviewing all major contracts, and had already terminated 2 department heads loyal to Grandpa, citing restructuring needs. Most concerning, Sandra told me during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from the office, he has been having closed-door meetings with representatives from Global Enterprises. My stomach dropped. Global Enterprises was our largest competitor, a corporate giant that had tried to buy Wilson Manufacturing 3 times in the past. Grandpa had always refused, believing they would dismantle the company and lay off most of our employees. Why would Richard be meeting with them? Unless, Sandra nodded grimly. I think he plans to sell the company. Fast. Before you can stop him. Using Sandra's access, we discovered emails between Richard and Global's acquisition team dating back 6 months, long before my birthday. In them, Richard discussed post-acquisition restructuring and his own role as a transitional consultant with a fee structure that would net him millions. He cannot sell without my signature, I said. Unless he can prove you are unfit to lead, or that the transfer was invalid, Sandra pointed out, which might explain the narrative about your grandfather's declining mental health. I felt sick. Richard was not just trying to control the company. He was setting up its sale while positioning himself to profit enormously. And he was using my mother to lend legitimacy to his actions. My former mentor at Wilson Manufacturing, Victor Ramirez, reached out next. Doug, something very wrong is happening here. Richard has reassigned half my team, given us impossible deadlines, then documented every missed target. It feels like he is setting us up to fail. Similar reports came from other departments. Richard was systematically reorganizing the company in ways that disrupted operations while documenting the resulting problems, building a case that the company was in trouble and needed new leadership or a buyer to save it. Meanwhile, my mother sent increasingly manipulative messages. Doug, please come home. We can work this out as a family. Your grandfather would want us to cooperate, not fight. Richard is only trying to protect what your grandfather built. When those did not work, she switched tactics. I cannot believe you would abandon me like this. After everything I sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me? Your father would be so disappointed in your behavior. That last one nearly broke me. Using my dead father as emotional leverage was a new low. With Sandra's help, I began investigating Richard's background more thoroughly than Grandpa ever had. What we found was disturbing. A pattern of inserting himself into successful family businesses, creating internal conflicts, and then profiting from the resulting chaos. 3 companies he had consulted for had been sold under questionable circumstances within a year of his involvement. He has left a trail of broken families and sold off companies, Sandra said, showing me the evidence. And he always comes out richer. We also discovered Richard's personal finances were in dire straits. Despite his outward success, he had massive gambling debts, a second mortgage on his previous home, and had been sued twice by former business partners. He needs money badly, I realized. And selling Wilson Manufacturing would solve all his problems. As the emergency board meeting approached, Richard grew bolder. He fired Sandra, claiming budget concerns. though we both knew it was because she remained loyal to Grandpa and me. He brought in his own people to key positions and began intensive meetings with board members, offering them special incentives for supporting the transition. 2 days before the board meeting, I received an anonymous message. Back off, or things will get worse. Some things are worth more than a company. The threat was clear, and it frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Richard even issued a press release announcing a modernization initiative at Wilson Manufacturing, with quotes from my mother about honoring Harold Wilson's legacy while adapting to changing markets. The subtext was clear. The old ways were ending, and Richard was the future. My attempts to access company financial systems were blocked, my credentials mysteriously disabled. When I called the IT department, I was told that Richard had ordered a security upgrade that required new authorizations for all executive accounts. The board meeting is our last chance, Sandra told me the night before. If Richard convinces them to approve the sale exploration, it will be nearly impossible to stop. Then we better make sure that does not happen, I said, reviewing our evidence one more time. Because this is not just about my inheritance anymore. It is about saving my grandfather's legacy and 500 jobs from a corporate raider disguised as family. What I did not know then was that Grandpa had been several steps ahead of us all along, and that the next day would reveal the true chess master in this high-stakes game of corporate control. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Wilson Manufacturing headquarters. Marcus drove me there, offering moral support and serving as an extra pair of eyes. Remember, most of these board members have known you since you were a kid, he said, as we parked across the street, watching Richard and my mother enter the building with a team of lawyers. They have to see through this power grab. Sandra had been terminated, but she had given her security badge to Lucy, a loyal accounting clerk, who let us in through a side entrance. Most employees are on your side, Lucy whispered as she guided us through back hallways. We all remember how your grandfather built this company, how he treated everyone like family. The boardroom was on the top floor, and as we approached, we could hear voices inside. Richard's distinctive, confident tone carried through the door. Significant offer that would benefit all shareholders, while ensuring the Wilson legacy continues under more secure management. Lucy squeezed my arm. Good luck. We are all counting on you. She disappeared down the hallway as I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The conversation stopped abruptly. 14 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from surprise to relief to annoyance. Richard stood at the head of the table, my grandfather's usual position, with my mother seated to his right. 3 men in expensive suits I recognized as Global Enterprises executives sat nearby. Doug. Richard recovered quickly, his smile not reaching his eyes. This is a closed board meeting. Security will escort you out. I own 75% of this company, I replied, stepping fully into the room with Marcus behind me. I believe that entitles me to attend any meeting. Vernon Miller, the CFO, cleared his throat awkwardly. Actually, there are questions about the validity of that transfer, which is partly why we are meeting today. Richard gestured to a thick folder before him. We have documentation suggesting Harold was not of sound mind when he made that impulsive decision. Several medical opinions confirm early-stage cognitive decline, consistent with dementia. Convenient diagnoses from doctors he never actually visited, I countered. Moving toward the table, a security guard appeared in the doorway. Sir, I need to ask you to leave. Jeffrey, I have known you for 10 years, I said to the guard. You know this is wrong. The guard hesitated, looking between me and Richard. Doug, please do not make this more difficult, my mother said, her voice quavering. We are trying to do what is best for everyone. By selling to Global Enterprises, the same company Grandpa refused to sell to 3 times because they would dismantle everything he built? Murmurs ran through the board members. Richard's face hardened. That is merely one option being explored, he said smoothly. Now, if you will excuse us, we have important matters to discuss. Show them the projections, Richard, I challenged. Show them how you have manipulated the numbers to make it look like Wilson Manufacturing is struggling when we just had our most profitable quarter ever. Richard's jaw tightened. These are complex financial matters that require expertise to understand. Perhaps when you have more experience. I have copies of the real financials, I interrupted, pulling papers from my bag, and emails showing Richard has been planning this sale for months, including his personal consulting fee of $3 million for facilitating the deal. The room erupted in confused conversation. Board members reached for the documents I began distributing. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. Security, remove him now. The guard took a hesitant step forward, but stopped when another voice spoke from the doorway. I believe my grandson has every right to be here. The room fell silent as my grandfather walked in, straight-backed and clear-eyed, followed by Thomas Blackwell and two people I did not recognize. Harold, my mother gasped. You should not be here. Your doctors said. My doctors, Grandpa interrupted with a wry smile, have given me a clean bill of health. Jennifer, the ones you and Richard consulted, however, never actually examined me. Fascinating how they could diagnose dementia without ever meeting the patient. Richard had gone pale. Harold, this is a misunderstanding. We were concerned about your health. After some memory lapses we observed. Memory lapses you invented, Grandpa countered, taking the seat opposite Richard. Thomas, would you share the real documents with the board, please? Thomas Blackwell opened his briefcase and began distributing folders. These are the complete transfer documents, including several provisions Mr. Wilson asked me not to disclose until this moment. Richard frantically flipped through the papers, his composure cracking. These cannot be legal. I have already seen the transfer documents. You saw what I wanted you to see, Grandpa said calmly. The first rule of business, Richard. Always read the fine print. Thomas stood. If I may explain to the board. While Mr. Wilson did indeed transfer 75% ownership to Douglas, there was a 30-day probationary period during which Harold retained final decision-making authority. This was designed specifically as a safeguard against exactly this type of situation. Richard jumped to his feet. This is absurd. You cannot retroactively change a legal transfer. It was not retroactive, Thomas replied. It was in the original documents. Page 12, Section 4, Paragraph 3, which you apparently did not read carefully before attempting to forge Douglas's signature on new directives. The board members were now all examining their copies, murmuring in surprise. Furthermore, Thomas continued, Mr. Wilson had concerns about potential conflicts of interest, so he instructed me to conduct background investigations on all parties who might influence company decisions, including you, Mr. Brooks. At Thomas's nod, one of the unknown men stepped forward and introduced himself. James Reynolds, private investigator. I have documented Mr. Brooks's gambling debts, financial mismanagement, and pattern of infiltrating family businesses before orchestrating their sale. Richard lunged for the door, but the security guard, now firmly on our side, blocked his path. Let him go, Jeffrey, Grandpa said calmly. Richard's legal problems are just beginning, but they will be handled by the proper authorities. Richard froze, then turned back to face my mother. Jennifer, tell them, this is ridiculous. Tell them, I was only trying to help the company. My mother sat rigid, her face ashen as she stared at the investigator's report in front of her. You told me the company was in trouble, she whispered. You said Doug was too inexperienced, that selling was the only way to protect our future. Jennifer, Richard's voice took on a pleading tone I had never heard before. Everything I did was for us, including the offshore account you set up to receive your consultant fee? I asked. Was that for us too? My mother's head snapped up. What offshore account? The second unknown man spoke up. Peter Davidson, forensic accountant. Mr. Brooks established an account in the Cayman Islands 3 months ago. Transfers were arranged to this account upon completion of the sale to Global Enterprises, separate from any proceeds that would go to the Wilson family. My mother stood slowly, her hands shaking. You were going to take the money and leave, weren't you? Once the company was sold, once you had your millions, you were planning your exit. Richard's face contorted with fury and desperation. This is a setup. Harold has manipulated everything because he cannot accept that his company needs new leadership. New leadership, Grandpa agreed calmly. But not yours. Doug will lead Wilson Manufacturing, as I always intended. And as for manipulation, Richard, I learned long ago to recognize predators circling my company. Did you really think I would not investigate the man who married my daughter-in-law so soon after inserting himself into our business affairs? The representatives from Global Enterprises had been watching this drama unfold with increasing discomfort. One of them stood now, buttoning his suit jacket. I believe we should reschedule our discussions for another time. There will be no other time, Grandpa informed them. Wilson Manufacturing is not for sale. It never was. And under Doug's leadership, it never will be. Richard made one last desperate attempt. The board still needs to vote. I have support from key members who understand the business realities better than a sentimental old man and his inexperienced grandson. Actually, Thomas interjected, the board does not need to vote on ownership transfer. And as for operations, he handed another document to the board chairman. This details the creation of Wilson Innovation, a new company that already holds all the key patents, client contracts, and intellectual property previously owned by Wilson Manufacturing. For the first time, Richard looked truly defeated. That is not possible. The IP transfer would have required board approval, not when the IP was developed by a subsidiary that I personally owned, Grandpa explained. I transferred those assets to the new company last month, along with offers of employment to our most valuable team members. Wilson Innovation is already operational, with Doug as CEO and me as Chairman Emeritus. The room fell silent as the magnitude of Grandpa's countermove became clear. Richard had been outmaneuvered before he even began his play. You set me up, Richard whispered. This whole thing, the birthday gift, everything. It was a trap. Grandpa's expression was almost pitying. I gave you every chance to prove you were not what I suspected. You failed that test spectacularly. The board meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Richard stormed out, threatening lawsuits. The Global Enterprises team retreated in confusion. Board members clustered around Grandpa and me, asking questions about the new company structure and their own positions. Through it all, my mother sat alone, her world visibly crumbling around her. When our eyes met across the room, I saw something I had not seen in years. Clarity and profound regret. As the boardroom cleared, Grandpa, Thomas, and I moved to Grandpa's private office, which Richard had so briefly occupied. The nameplates had already been changed back. I noticed with satisfaction. You knew, I said once we were alone. You knew what he was planning all along. Grandpa settled into his leather chair with a sigh that spoke of both exhaustion and relief. I suspected from the beginning. Richard Brooks was too perfect, too interested in your mother so soon after your father's death. My investigator found concerning patterns in his past, but nothing concrete enough to convince Jennifer. So, you set a trap, I said, still processing the morning's events. I created a test, Grandpa corrected. I gave Richard exactly what he wanted. An apparent opportunity to seize control. Then, I watched what he did with it. Thomas Blackwell nodded. Your grandfather came to me 6 months ago with concerns. We developed a contingency plan that would protect the company while exposing Richard's true intentions. The real transfer documents gave you majority ownership, Grandpa explained. But with the 30-day testing period before control fully transferred, I needed to see if Richard would make his move. And he did. Faster and more aggressively than even I anticipated. But what about Wilson Innovation? When did you create that? Grandpa smiled. Remember all those fishing trips over the past year where I was teaching you about business? I was also quietly building our backup plan. Wilson Innovation was incorporated 8 months ago. Key patents and intellectual property have been gradually transferred. Our most loyal employees were discreetly approached with positions in the new company. The old Wilson Manufacturing still exists, Thomas added. But without its core assets, it is essentially a shell company with some real estate and equipment. If Richard had succeeded in selling it to Global Enterprises, They would have discovered too late that they bought a hollow prize. I shook my head in amazement. You let me think I had lost everything. You disappeared. Would not answer my calls. I had to, Grandpa said, his expression softening. Your reactions needed to be genuine. If you had known about the plan, Richard might have sensed something was off. Your righteous anger was our best weapon. The door opened, and my mother stood there, her eyes red from crying. May I come in? Grandpa nodded. And she entered hesitantly, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had seen her in years. I did not know, she said, her voice breaking. About the offshore accounts. About selling the company behind our backs. I believed him when he said he was protecting our future, that Doug needed guidance before taking over. He manipulated you, I said. Not quite ready to forgive, but understanding better now. He isolated you from us, made you dependent on him. She nodded miserably. After your father died, I was so lost. Richard seemed so strong, so certain about everything. I trusted him completely. Richard is a con man of the highest order, Grandpa said. Not unkindly. He has done this before. Jennifer, you were not his first target. And had he succeeded, you would not have been his last victim. My mother wiped away tears. What happens now? With the company, with us? With everything? Richard will likely threaten lawsuits, Thomas answered. But he has no case. The documents were all legally executed, and we have evidence of his attempted fraud. More concerning for him, we have forwarded information about his financial manipulations to the SEC and FBI. Grandpa stood and walked to the window overlooking the manufacturing floor below. As for the company, Wilson Innovation will absorb most of Wilson Manufacturing's operations over the next few months. No jobs will be lost except for the people Richard brought in. In fact, we will likely expand once the transition is complete. He turned to face me. Doug will be CEO, as planned. I will serve as advisor for as long as he needs me, but this is his company to lead now. My mother looked at me uncertainly. And us? Our family? That was the harder question. The betrayal still felt raw. Even understanding that she had been manipulated. We rebuild, I said finally. Slowly. With better boundaries and more honesty. She nodded, accepting this partial olive branch as the most I could offer right now. As if on cue, Richard's voice boomed from the outer office, followed by the sounds of security being called. He had returned, apparently to collect his belongings, and was making threats loud enough for everyone to hear. You cannot do this to me. I will sue all of you. This company will be mine, one way or another. Through the glass walls, I could see security officers escorting him toward the elevators, his face contorted with rage. As the doors closed on him, a strange quiet fell over the office. That man, Grandpa said with a shake of his head, never understood the most important lesson in business. Which is, I asked, that companies are not just balance sheets and assets. They are people, relationships, trust built over decades. Richard saw Wilson Manufacturing as something to take and sell. We see it as something to build and preserve. The day concluded with an impromptu company meeting where Grandpa and I explained the transition to Wilson Innovation. There was confusion, certainly, but also relief, as employees learned their jobs were secure and Richard's brief reign was over. As we left the building that evening, Grandpa put his arm around my shoulders. You did well today. Stood your ground, spoke with authority, showed compassion to your mother. Despite everything, I learned from the best, I replied, feeling the weight of the day's events, but also a new sense of purpose. Though I wish you had trusted me with the plan. Next time, he promised with a wink. Though let us hope there is not a next time. One corporate espionage drama per lifetime is quite enough. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my office at Wilson Innovation headquarters, watching employees arrive for our company-wide anniversary celebration. The past 12 months had been challenging but transformative, both for the business and for me personally. Wilson Innovation had not just survived the transition, it had thrived. Our core manufacturing business had expanded, and we had developed 2 new product lines that were already showing strong market potential. Our workforce had grown from 500 to nearly 650 people. More importantly, we had rebuilt the company culture that had always been Grandpa's pride, one based on mutual respect, innovation, and treating employees like extended family. The dark cloud of Richard's brief takeover attempt had completely dissipated. The legal aftermath with Richard had been messy but ultimately decisive. Faced with evidence of fraud and SEC investigations into his financial dealings, he had eventually accepted a settlement that required him to leave the state and sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. Last I heard, he had moved to Florida and was attempting to rebuild his consulting business, though his reputation had been severely damaged. My relationship with my mother had taken longer to heal. After finalizing her divorce from Richard, she had moved into a small house near Grandpa's, where she slowly began rebuilding her independence and self-confidence. Our weekly dinners were initially awkward, filled with careful conversation and unspoken regrets. But gradually, we found our way back to something resembling trust. I let myself become someone I did not recognize. She confessed during one of those dinners, "After your father died, I was so afraid of being alone, of making wrong decisions, that I handed my power to the first confident man who came along." "We all have blind spots," I told her, finding forgiveness easier as I watched her genuine efforts to change. Richard was an expert at exploiting vulnerability. Grandpa had eased into his advisory role with surprising grace. He came into the office 3 days a week, mostly to mentor younger employees and provide historical perspective during planning meetings. The rest of the time, he enjoyed a semi-retirement that he had postponed for too long. Our Sunday fishing tradition continued, though the conversations had evolved. Instead of Grandpa teaching me, we now exchanged ideas as equals. I valued his wisdom more than ever. But I also recognized that some decisions needed to be mine alone. The true test of leadership, Grandpa told me during one such fishing trip, is not how you handle success, but how you respond to betrayal and setbacks. You passed that test with flying colors, Doug. The company anniversary celebration was in full swing when Sandra, now our chief operating officer, appeared at my office door. "Everyone is waiting for your speech," she reminded me with a smile. "And your grandfather is already telling the story of Richard's face when he realized he had been outplayed." I laughed. "That story gets more dramatic every time he tells it." As I made my way to the podium in our transformed warehouse space, I saw faces both familiar and new. Marcus was there, having joined our marketing department 6 months ago. Lucy from accounting had been promoted to department head. Thomas Blackwell sat with my mother and Grandpa at a front table. 1 year ago, I began. Wilson Innovation was born out of both necessity and vision. We faced a challenge that could have destroyed everything Harold Wilson spent decades building. Instead, it made us stronger. I looked at Grandpa, who nodded encouragingly. The most valuable lesson I learned through that experience was not about business strategy or corporate structure. It was about the importance of building something with integrity, surrounding yourself with people who share your values, and recognizing that true ownership is not just about legal documents. It is about responsibility to the people who depend on you. The room filled with applause, and I felt a sense of rightness that had been hard-won. Moving forward, Wilson Innovation will continue to evolve and grow, but we will never lose sight of the principles that got us here. Treating people with respect, making products we can be proud of, and building a company that strengthens our community, rather than extracting from it. After the speeches and celebration, Grandpa found me by the refreshment table. "Your father would be incredibly proud of you," he said, his eyes bright with emotion. "I know I am. I could not have done any of this without you," I replied. "Your foresight saved everything." He shook his head. "I just created the opportunity. You rose to meet it. That was the true test. And you passed it brilliantly." As I drive home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just over a year. From the birthday surprise that seemed like a dream come true, through the nightmare of betrayal, to the challenging but rewarding reality of actually running a growing company. The inheritance had been both a gift and a test, revealing character and intention in everyone around me. It showed me who I could truly count on, taught me to verify before trusting, and demonstrated that family bonds needed to be based on more than blood or legal ties. Most importantly, I learned that legacies are not simply passed down, they are actively built and protected by each generation. My grandfather had not just given me a company, he had shown me how to be worthy of leading it. That knowledge, more than any dollar amount, was the true inheritance. What about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground against people trying to take what was rightfully yours? Or learned that someone you trusted was not who they appeared to be? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found value in my story, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself is worth it, even when it means facing people you love. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the impact you make and the legacy you build.